What's going on, y'all? How's everybody been doing? So we're gonna just talk about a few things. So you guys all know I'm all about, helping, other drivers and, just spreading useful information to whom it might apply and to whom it might help. The problem is a lot of drivers or people that want to become drivers, they don't want to do the work. What I mean by that is they just want everything handed to them. I've been doing this trucking for a while. I know I look young, but I've been doing it for a while. I've worked for Stevens. I've worked for Warner. I've worked for a few mom and pop carriers. I've worked for FedEx Ground. I've worked for AAA Cooper and currently Southeastern Freight Lines. I've done well over 400 videos on YouTube, and out of all those videos, some of you guys might notice that I've never talked about pay. I might mention, the CPM or the hourly rate, but you guys have never heard me post a single pay stub or talk about how much money I am making. And I get comments about that, about how much money can you make? And a lot of times you'll get a response that says, it depends, or I simply don't respond to it. Some of you guys have asked about drug testing, and you'll notice a lot of times I don't respond to it, or I'll say, if you have to ask, you're not ready. It's certain questions that some of you guys ask that I just don't respond to. I see a lot of questions in the various groups that I'm in. Groups like LTL Underground, LTL Truck Drivers, Bonehead Truckers, Black Truck Drivers Only. Groups like those, I can go on and on. And it's like the questions are so redundant. And another question that I see too is SAP related questions. And some of y'all have asked me about that, and I almost never respond to that. And I'm not trying to be rude, but when did people stop wanting to do research? Like I said, I'm all for helping you guys. I'm all for passing information. But at the end of the day, it's up to you. They have these recruiters, they have people in the office that are there to answer any questions that you might have. And I always tell you guys, use these videos. What's the word I want to look for? Yeah, of course you can use it for information, but at the end of the day, it's still your job to call these companies and get all the information that you want. Don't just go off of my videos or the next YouTuber's videos or what you see on the internet. It's still your responsibility to call. There's a lot of groups on like Facebook, for example, where you have to wait for it to get approval. And some of you guys are asking simple questions, like the time that you spend waiting for somebody to respond, or if they even respond at all, you could have called that company up and they could have answered your questions in 0.2 seconds. If you want to know how much the hourly pay is, call that company and ask them. They may or may not tell you. Some companies are tight-lipped about what the pay is. Sometimes they'll only disclose that in an interview. But if they do tell you, do some basic math. So since I'm an LTL driver, we're going to touch on the LTL side of it. If you want to do P&D, you can find out how much the hourly rate is and just throw a ballpark number in there. If you're a city driver, you might work anywhere between maybe 40 hours to maybe 55 hours. So if they're paying, let's say $35 an hour to be a P&D driver, and let's say you only work 40 hours for that week, you can almost calculate how much you're going to make. Or let's say on the high end, you work 55 hours, you can calculate that. You know, if you want to do line haul, you know, where I'm at, it's 83 cents a mile. You know, if you run, let's say 3,000 miles for that week, you can figure out how much you're going to make. And then you can, of course, factor in your drop and hook pay, you know, so you can pretty much do like a what if you're looking at a specific company. The reason I don't talk about the pay and how much I'm making is because it's going to be different. You know, when I was at Stevens, I wasn't making the same money that every other driver. Is different because there's a lot of different factors. When I worked at Warner, there's a bunch of different factors. I was on a different account. You know, when I was at Warner, I worked on the Home Depot account. You know, a person coming into Warner, you might be on the Coca-Cola account, or you might be on the Family Dollar account. So of course your pay is going to be different from what I was making. You know, back when I was at AAA Cooper, of course, my pay is going to be different from other drivers. I'm not saying that I'm making more, and I'm not saying I'm making less, but the fact of the matter is the pay is going to be different. The type of runs that you're doing is going to play a part. You know, at Cooper, you work the dock depending on the terminal. So that's also going to play a factor. So if you're at a terminal that works the dock, you might make more or less than somebody that's at a terminal where they don't have to work the dock. You know, I also ran teams back when I was at Cooper as well. You know, again, that's going to play a different factor. You know, some of these other LTL carriers, they start you off on a sliding scale, meaning you may not come in at the top out. So of course that's going to play a factor in how much you make, the type of runs you do. You know, here at Southeastern, we all come in at the same CPM, 83 cents a mile. Now, of course, if you run teams, it's going to be different. It's going to vary. Hang on one second. So here we all come in at the same amount. But again, the different runs, you know, I run the system, you know, so I'm going somewhere different each and every night. So of course, every week, my pay is going to be different. So it wouldn't be beneficial in telling y'all I'm making this much, because each week my check is going to be different. You know, your deductions is going to play a factor as well. You know, some of you guys might pay child support. Some of you guys might not. You know, some of you guys might have a family, so you might be on a family plan. So again, you might have more or less deductions coming out of your check each and every week. Location is going to play a big role in that as well. You know, some LTLs, depending on the state, you might come in at a different hourly rate. And I'm speaking on if you're a city driver. You know, Florida might pay different from what Texas and Texas might pay different from what Illinois pays, you know, on the hourly side of things. You know, if you live in California, from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're all on an hourly rate, whether you're P&D and line haul, they're all paid hourly. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I understand, that's how they pay. So again, you need to just look at these different things and just understand that everybody is going to get paid differently. And I just encourage you guys and ladies, just do your research. You know, stop being lazy. That's what I'm pretty much going to say. Stop being lazy. Like, a lot of y'all expect things to just be handed to you. You guys don't want to do the work. You know, me personally, there's been companies that I've been interested in. You know, back when I was at Cooper, of course, y'all know I was interested in Southeastern. I was interested in Old Dominion. I looked into FedEx Freight at one point. Now, of course, during that time, yes, I would call Small Fry up and ask him questions about the company. But at the end of the day, I still did my due diligence and called Old Dominion and got all the information that I needed, and still kept all the information that he gave and applied that. You know, I always said if I got out of LTL, I would go to fuel. Now, of course, I can hit up Colton and ask him, you know, what's it like at Love's? You know, how much are they paying? You know, what are the benefits like? But at the end of the day, I'm still going to call Gemini up and ask them, you know, what are the benefits like? You know, on the low end, what can I make? On the high end, what can I potentially make? You know, the same with CAG. I can easily call Chris up right now and say, you know what, what are the miles looking like over at CAG? What are the benefits like? I would never rely on just what I see on the internet and use the internet as a decision. Do your research. Do your research. Now, let me touch on the people that are maybe in the SAP program. I've never been in the SAP program, so I can't answer any questions SAP related. So I wish some of y'all would stop asking me SAP related questions, because I don't know. Drug testing, I'm just going to go ahead and say this. If you have to ask, you're not ready. Point of this video is stop being lazy. Do your research. Do your research. I'll catch you on the next one.